In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. That's probably one of the best ways to describe Warhammer. In almost every Warhammer story, people die in the millions, either due to wanting to unify each other, or simply just wipe each other out due to some religious fanaticism. One such faction is the totalitarian Imperium of Man, who's obsessed with worshipping their god emperor who's practically a corpse, and military might. One such example of their military might is the Space Marines. These roided up space soldiers are often looked at as the face of Warhammer 40k. And a big reason for that is not only how much Games Workshop talks about the Imperium of Man, but also because of the game Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. Which, if you've watched Russian Badger, you've probably heard something about this game. This game released a long ass time ago, and I was starting to lose hope. But it's just as they say, the Emperor protects. So, gameplay-wise, Space Marine is an interesting hybrid. On one hand, it's a third-person shooter, with lots of weapons that you can use to absolutely tear apart your enemies. On the other, it's an absolutely brutal hack-and-slash game, which makes you feel like a true angel of death. It also has a story that's generic, but embodies the Warhammer universe pretty well. I think that despite its issues, it actually represents the universe pretty well, especially in regards to its presentation of the story. So there's 3 key sections I'm going to go over when it comes to Space Marine. First, I'm going to do some miscellaneous criticisms and praises I have for the game. Then I'm going to talk a bit about the story and the gameplay. But yeah, let's get into this.
Greetings, Cotton. I've been trying to transmit a message to you about your car's extended warranty.
First thing I gotta say is, the graphics of this game look pretty damn good, and help to bring the Warhammer aesthetic to life. And though there's definitely better looking Warhammer games out there, I think the graphics engine helps to highlight the dark and gritty atmosphere of Warhammer's aesthetic. Another thing I really like is how good the animations are. Like, butchering the orcs just looks so fucking good. And don't even get me started on the executions for Chaos, because they are so fucking cool. Like, struggling to fight a Chaos Space Marine, and then promptly shoving a chainsword through his brain is one of the most satisfying things to see in this game. And another thing, the sound design is absolutely incredible. Every gun you fire feels like it just packs a punch. Case in point, each of those guns just sounds like they take chunks out of the enemies whenever they hit. And I especially love how they made the bolter actually sound menacing as fuck. Like, I feel like a lot of the time, the iterations of the bolter sound that we get aren't exactly the best. But how can I just talk about the sound design without talking about the soundtrack as well? Let me just play an example real quick. So in short, the soundtrack is great and really helps to capture the atmosphere of the world. Through the music, you can tell that Warhammer is a dark universe, but that you, as a Space Marine, have the strength to survive and navigate in it. Now, let's talk about the story.
The Codex Astartes does not support this action.
Try to keep up.
So the best way I can sum up Space Marine story is, it's good, but generic. Now, before I get into nitpicking the story, let's talk about what it does well. First off, it portrays 40k's grimdark atmosphere particularly well. Because even though you're a Space Marine equipped with some of the best technology known to man, and you can take on demons and aliens, a good deal of the humans you encounter are just Imperial Guardsmen trying to survive, and pretty much just want to stay alive in such a horrible situation. Now at this point you might be wondering, what horrible situation? Well, Forge World Graia is currently under attack from the average British football fan. They're attacking the Forge World of Graia so that they can secure all the weaponry that the Imperium has, and of course, get into a good fight while they're at it. And considering how numerous the Orc Horde is, I can't blame anyone for losing hope. The main character also is a unique Ultramarine for once. He respects the Codex Astartes, but doesn't follow it as blindly as some of his other battle brothers. One thing it does extremely well is showing how broken the world is. Everywhere you go, what might have been a proud civilization at one point has turned into a barren, war-torn wasteland, riddled with blood and corpses, and really helps to sell how fucked up the Warhammer universe is. Another thing I like is the scale of the story. The story and cutscenes have a really bombastic tone, and enough explosions to be right at home in a Michael Bay movie. Like, it shows just how massive the Warhammer 40k universe and its battles are. It also helps to highlight just how massive the Warhammer 40k universe is with shots like this, and helps to paint villains such as the Orcs and Chaos as actual genuine threats to the Imperium. Now, let's talk about what I didn't really like. So, Ultramarines are known for having plot armor of some sort, and Captain Titus literally has plot armor against the warp. And it's one of the biggest mysteries as to whether this makes him a heretic or not. However, his resistance to the warp isn't ever, explored. Maybe it'll be elaborated on in Space Marine 2, but I don't know. Next up, the story is like a rehash of several other Imperium of Man stories, in which Xenos Invasion Force decides to attack an Imperium planet. Imperial Guard struggles to fight off said invasion force and asks for help. In response, the Imperium sends a chapter of Space Marines to help out. A bloody battle is fought, and the Imperium emerges victorious, however with a lot of casualties. But hey, who needed all those people anyways, right? And Space Marine essentially has that same story, except Chaos is shoehorned in. And speaking of Chaos, let me just take a moment to rant about the main villain, Lord Nemeroth. While I took Chaos and the Orcs as, serious threats, I could not take Lord Nemeroth seriously. I literally took Lord Nemeroth about as seriously as I took Steppenwolf from Justice League. So basically, Nemeroth is a villain who just wants power for the sake of having power. Overall, I feel like there's been better Chaos Space Marine characters, and though Nemeroth kept trying to act tough, all I can say is, he was talking a lot of shit for someone in QuickTime event range. So overall, despite my issues with the story, I still think it's an okay story. If I had to give it a number rating, it would probably be a 7 out of 10. We've definitely seen better stories out of the Warhammer universe, but anyways, let's talk about the gameplay now. So, as stated earlier, Space Marine is sort of like a hybrid of hack and slash and third-person shooter mechanics. So, the game mixes these two mechanics in a pretty interesting playstyle. First, you clear out gunners from long range, and then get up close and personal with enemies that primarily use melee weapons. Wait, is it pronounced melee or melee? I don't fucking know anymore. Now, let's discuss the weapon sandbox and the actual gameplay mechanics themselves. So, let's start out with the melee weapons. There, I finally got it right. Thank you, Rice. The game first starts you out with a combat knife, which is a pretty basic melee weapon if I'm being honest. As in the next, I want to say half hour, you end up getting a chainsword. The chainsword is a lot more powerful and is probably my favorite melee weapon in the entire game. I also absolutely love the executions for the chainsword. So yeah, the chainsword is my favorite. The next close combat weapon you can get is a power axe. Now, though I don't really like it, I still think it's pretty powerful. Only real reason I use the chainsword over it is because it's a lot faster to use. So overall, this thing hits like a truck, but if you're not ready for it to be a bit slower than, say, the chainsword or the knife, you're not gonna have a fun time. The final weapon is the Thunder Hammer, which is essentially what happens when you put an earthquake into hammer form. Literally, when you pick this shit up, your testosterone levels skyrocket. This thing just absolutely decimates everything you run into. It also locks you out from using any ranged weapons other than the standard bolter and bolt pistol. But who the fuck needs that when you have the testosterone handler? Basically, every single one of these melee weapons has a combo system. So I'm gonna demonstrate that using the chainsword in a moment. So the first move you get is a light stun. You can also do a light attack, which can then be paired with a stun. So basically, you can chain light attacks and a stun throughout the course of your fighting. However, one of my biggest issues with the melee combat is the fact that it just all feels kind of the same. which I guess kinda helps if the developer's goal was to foster a sense of familiarity with each weapon. But that's not to say that the melee combat is bad, because it definitely isn't. Now, the more interesting part of the sandbox, in my opinion, is the ranged weapons. The first one you get is the bolt pistol. This is probably the most rudimentary weapon you could ever get. And for a starting weapon, it actually hits like a truck. However, it's later replaced with the far superior plasma pistol, which can also be charged to deliver an explosive payload. The next weapon you get is the bolter. This is probably my favorite gun in the entirety of the game. It's just a lot of fun to use, even for a starter weapon, and it absolutely takes chunks out of the enemies. And honestly, I couldn't blame anyone for just trying to go through the entire game with just the bolt gun. After that, you get a Stalker Bolter, which is essentially the sniper rifle of the game. And honestly, it hits like a fucking truck. Then, the fourth weapon you receive is the Vengeance Launcher. This essentially fills the role of a crowd control grenade launcher. It has a pretty simple gameplay design. Stick a grenade to an enemy, stick another to another enemy, and then detonate them all. Another thing I should have mentioned earlier is that you can rip off turrets such as plasma cannons and heavy bolters, and use them as a separate weapon. The next major weapon you get access to, though, is the Melt-A-Gun. This is effectively the Dragon's Breath shotgun of Warhammer 40k, and it's really just proof of the statement that if you apply enough heat to something, it will fucking die. The next weapon is the Las Cannon. This weapon is literally the fuck you gun. Just like you don't fuck with the high ground, Anakin, you don't fuck with the fucking Las Cannon. It will not end well. Like, it legitimately wouldn't be far off to say this is the most powerful gun in the entire game. Like, if you told me this is what was used in Exterminatus of a Planet, I would believe you. The second to last weapon you get access to is the Plasma Gun. This is like if you took the Plasma Pistol that you get earlier, up its strength to approximately Las Cannon levels of fuck you, and then throw it into a rifle-shaped form. This shit is what you get. Now let's talk about the most forgettable weapon, the Storm Bolter. This was meant to be an SMG, but it turns out to be just a pile of shit. First off, the biggest issue is it's a bullet hose. Secondly, there's nothing the Storm Bolter can do that the Bolter can't do better. For one, the Bolter has better damage output and range. And secondly, it doesn't burn through ammo faster than Wildfire Season burns through California. So to conclude,
you don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would.
So now let's get to talking about the playstyle and mechanics of this game. So during each combat encounter, the first thing you want to do is clear out any ranged enemies, then getting up close and personal with close range enemies. And if you're low on health, finish off any enemies you can. And in order to do finishers, you need to do a few light attacks chained with a stun. And when you see an enemy glowing blue, that's when you can finish them. You also get access to an ability called Fury, which ups your melee damage and lets you regen health. Fury also slows down your perception of time whenever you aim down sights. So say you want to be really precise with your shots, but also needed to regen health, well, there's Fury. Another thing I need to note about Space Marines combat, especially in regards to the finishers, is that with smaller enemies such as Gretchens and Chaos Soldiers, you can literally just play Child Punching Simulator. I'm going to hell for that one. But all in all, I feel like all of these elements sort of combine together to make a pretty fun gameplay experience. However, let's talk about one of my biggest issues with the gameplay. A lot of it is repetitive. Now, I'll admit that playing it for the first hour or two was pretty goddamn fun. However, after that, it started feeling a bit stale. And that's not because the gameplay is bad, because it's not. It just gets kinda tiring after a bit. So for most of my time playing the game, I would just pace myself a bit, and sort of play in bursts. So basically no longer than like 1 or 2 hours. Another issue I have with the game is kind of connected to the previous point, and that is that even when Chaos shows up, it's kind of samey. Like, don't get me wrong, it's definitely cool to fight Chaos. In fact, they're my favorite enemy in all of 40k. But realistically, the tactics you use against them are largely the same. But then again, that may be my time spent spamming a las cannon on Chaos Space Marines and Orc Knobs talking. Now let's also talk about another area of the game which I don't really like, the boss fights. So there's 3 boss fights in the game. First is a true masterpiece of orc engineering. Second is the average British football fan, who in my opinion is the best boss in the game. And finally, the Chaos Lord of QuickTime Events, Lord Nemeroth. So the first boss is mid. That's really the best way to describe it. The main thing that holds this boss fight back for me is the arena design. It's really constricted, and there's not a whole lot of cover. However, despite how much I may dislike it, I don't think it's the worst boss fight in the game. The next boss fight is Boss Grimskull, who I think is the best boss in the entire game. For one, he's actually engaging, because every single time you damage him enough, he always runs off to another portion of the room after blinding you. He also has a charge attack that can one-shot you if you're not careful. And as you damage him more and more throughout the fight, he begins summoning other orcs to his cause, so they can try and beat the shit out of you. Keyword try. They won't succeed. Eventually, he tries to use the high ground to his advantage, but unfortunately for him, he is not Obi-Wan Kenobi, and thus it does not work out for him. Now, let's talk about the worst boss fight in the entire game. And that, of course, is the one Chaos Lord who was so much of a bitch boy to the point where he literally got defeated by QuickTime events. Lord Nemeroth. Like, how the fuck is this motherfucker the main villain of the game? Dude's boss fight is the most flat shit I have ever seen in my fucking life. Like, how the hell are you gonna build up such a fucking epic confrontation by sending several waves of enemies after Captain Titus, and make that the most engaging part of the boss fight? Literally, it consists of approximately 3 or 4 waves of Chaos Demons and Space Marines charging at you, ready to tear your guts out. Like you would expect after slaying through several waves of Chaos Space Marines, Demons, and Guardsmen, who just want to rip you a new one, that this motherfucker, who has ascended to demonhood and gained immeasurable amounts of power, to pose an actual challenge. Ha! You guessed wrong, bitch! The entire fight is just QuickTime events and flying through a warp storm. Is that even a warp storm? I don't know. Like, if someone walked up to me after playing Space Marine and legitimately told me they struggled with this boss, I would actually bully the fuck out of them. I do not care. I would simply set aside the social awkwardness just to roast the shit out of them for being so fucking bad at a simple ass boss fight. But that's all I really gotta say on Lord Nemeroth. He's a fucking bitch boy boss fight.
For the love of God! For the love of God! Please! Damn! Damn!
And I think that wraps up my Space Marine review. I think that in spite of its issues with its story and gameplay, it's actually a really damn fun game. And if you're looking for a light introduction to the Warhammer franchise, I cannot recommend this game enough. This was the game to get me into Warhammer. While it may not be on the same level of awesome as the first Dawn of War game, it's still a pretty damn good game overall, and represents the Warhammer universe particularly well. So yeah, if you ever see this game on a sale, go for it. But yeah, that's all I got for the campaign review. Have a great day or night.